Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Miranda, 24, came to the regional center from a remote village where jobs were not just difficult, but very difficult. There were a lot of such villages and hamlets across America, and young people tried every way to get out of there, to big cities, hoping to get a foothold, and if not to build a cool career, at least to provide themselves more or less decent existence, and to help relatives. But the cities were in no hurry to accept them with open arms, because they had enough unemployed. Therefore, the villagers were often satisfied with unskilled hard labor and rented rooms. The parents, of course, dissuaded their only daughter as best they could, but she stubbornly argued that it would be better for everyone. In the end, they gave up, having decided that their daughter was an adult, and the prospects in the city for a young woman, of course, will be more. And not only in terms of her career, but also on the personal front. Miranda herself believed that life would get better, and she would be able to get an education, and in general to mortgage an apartment and make her life just like everyone else's, or at least not worse. She was also driven by a burning desire to become independent from her parents, who were in need no less than she was. She had to buy medicine, order firewood, or have the roof reboarded. In general, all around one costs. Miranda's life scenario was no different from that of the pioneers. Everything had to start from the beginning, without going through too much and not shying away from any kind of work. Miranda was accustomed to work from an early age. The village life had an impact, so at first she got a job at a vegetable warehouse. She worked there for 3 months. Then she quit her job as the insolent boss constantly tried to cut her wages, finding non-existent reasons to fine her. She had to look for another job and a new place to live. She lived in a wagon at the vegetable warehouse. It was good that she was allowed to live in the wagon for a few days. Otherwise, she would have had to look for work sitting on the street. The search was complicated by her lack of higher education and experience. But she stubbornly continued to read advertisements, buying newspapers specifically for this purpose. After a bit of agony, she found a job as a cashier in a supermarket with a low salary, a small room in a remote neighborhood, and a long, hour-long commute home on a shuttle bus, in the company of angry, sweaty-smelling women and drunken workers. It was certainly not an easy job, associated with stress and incompatible with life salary, but we had to choose. Either in her native village without any clear prospects, or to make a big effort and stay in the regional center. She chose the second. Every morning she drove to work, gritting her teeth, and in the evening she would return home in a crowded bus. One day was like another. Nothing changed, and it did not portend good prospects. In general, the same days, and every day she witnessed some kind of scandal. How many times she wanted to drop everything and leave. But the thought that at home, except for the devastation, nothing awaited her, stopped and forced her to endure. But fate must have decided to give her a chance, because one such day she met James, her future husband. Handsome, and as she thought at the time, a reliable man. If only she had known how reliable he would turn out to be. The meeting was trivial and uninteresting. Another customer came to the cash register, poured on a tape purchase. She punched in his product. He gathered his purchases into a bag, and then, quite unexpectedly for her, hurriedly wrote his phone number on the receipt and silently handed it to her. He thanked her for the excellent service and left. She bewilderedly put the check in her pocket, and then in the hustle and bustle of the day she completely forgot about it. She remembered after the shift, when suddenly the check fell out of her uniform pocket, picked it up, looked at the numbers, and from that moment thoughts of a beautiful stranger did not leave her all the way home, shaking in the minibus. She wondered why he had given her his number. She was ordinary-looking and rustic to the core, uneducated and unread. And he seemed to her to be quite intelligent, well-educated, and certainly knowledgeable about people in this mindset. The hour-long drive home passed unnoticed. Once home, she put all her doubts aside and called anyway. He surprised her from the first seconds of the conversation by calling her by her name. Although why be surprised if it was printed on her name tag? The conversation was not long, but was pleasant and relaxed. Miranda willingly answered his questions. He did not make a secret of his life either. From the conversation, it turned out that James was a local single guy. He works as a system administrator in a small retail chain. And then towards the end of the conversation, he asked her out on a date, and she, of course, said yes. These meetings became a regular occurrence. They took long walks, went to the movies, he gave her flowers, complimented her, and walked her home. What Miranda liked most about their relationship was that it wasn't that pushy, trivial thing like inviting her home for a cup of coffee. They just kissed at the doorway and went their separate ways. However, despite this, the main intimate moment came unexpectedly, bypassing all those cups of coffee. And it happened at the birthday party of Miranda, to which she had invited all her coworkers, and of course, James. If usually Miranda was unpretentious and could eat a bland meal, on that day she tried her best to cook simple country food. She did not want to. She wanted to surprise her guests, so she scoured the internet in search of recipes for original dishes. She made a lot of baked goods. In short, she put in her energy and savings. Then she put on makeup, being rather tired. In general, she was ready to receive guests. But instead of the expected ringing of the doorbell, she heard the phone ring. It was an employee of the same cashier as she was, with whom Miranda had already managed to become friends. "Hello, Lisa, hello." The employee's voice was a little annoyed and guilty at the same time. "You just do not take offense. I will not come. The gift is for me." "What happened?" "Yes, the hubby gave me another problem. He got drunk. I'm on my way to pick him up from the drunk tank. I'm not in the mood." "Sorry, I'll call you one day, girlfriend." As soon as Miranda put the phone down, it vibrated again. It was the grocer, invited together with Miranda's wife. "Good evening." "Miranda, circumstances are such, but I'm afraid we can't congratulate you in person today." "And why with a tired voice?" Miranda asked. "Reasons of a personal nature." Evasively he answered and began to wish her kind wishes, happiness, and a constant good mood. She listened absent-mindedly, thanked him, and said goodbye. She glanced at her watch. 15 minutes to go. The phone in her hand vibrated. "Don't tell me you're not coming," she said into the phone. "Listen, my husband slipped, broke his leg." "Looks like we're going to the emergency room," said another employee, invited along with her husband. "We're almost there. I slipped on the way off the bus. Sitting on a bench, waiting for a cab." "Oh, I think there's a cab." "Oh, okay. Chuckles, I'm sorry about that. Stay in touch." "There's that call again. That was the last one invited." "Well, why aren't you coming?" Miranda asked, not expecting anything good. "How did you know?" "Well, never mind." "Lisa, you know that I'm selling an apartment. I just got a call from a realtor saying they're coming to buy. I think they're all set to take it. I wish you all the best for now." She cordially listened. Congratulations wished her a successful deal and passed out from resentment. Tears came to her eyes. Her mood dropped completely. If James didn't come either, all was lost. She was interrupted by the ringing of the doorbell. It was him, James, her only and, frankly, long-awaited guest, and they'd spent their birthday together, and that was when she'd found out she was pregnant. For 3 days, she'd been wondering whether or not to tell him, since she didn't really believe James would be thrilled. She even wanted to have an abortion, but something compelled her to tell him. His reaction was both surprised and delighted at the same time. "So this is great," he exclaimed. "Let's get married." James was making good money as a system administrator, so there were no problems with money. We lived like everyone else. He worked, she stayed at home, cooked soup, and raised the little one. But she began to notice a certain aloofness in her husband's behavior. Overall, though, life continued in the same vein. The only adjustment was that there was a baby in the house, and that was the corresponding worries and problems. Miranda plunged into everyday life, and James began to stay late in the evenings, citing a busy schedule at work. She trusted him, but somehow more and more she thought he was seeing someone else. No, she didn't catch him with anyone in his pockets, no lace panties falling out, and no hickeys on his neck. He still ate her food, performed marital duty, and gave gifts. But it was all as if to say without a soul, just because he had to. Miranda got pregnant again, and now she is a girl. He accepted this news without much enthusiasm, but forbade her to have an abortion. Give birth. She gave birth. She cooked soups again and brought up 2 little ones. He was working, but now he was staying late not for 2 to 3 hours, but till night. He answered all his questions in a single voice. No, I don't know. And then Miranda noticed him texting someone, smiling every night. When she asked him who he was there with, he replied that he was with the new guy on the rabbit. Like he started asking dumb questions. So he smiles. James had stopped coming home ever since. Well, he did show up, but only to take a quick shower, change his clothes, and leave again. He didn't answer any more questions. He grimaced, growled something unintelligible, and left. But Miranda still considered herself happy. After all, she had 2 children. They were her main wealth and a reason to be proud. And the main subject of telephone conversations with parents and girlfriends, as well as a cause for concern to active, inquisitive, troublesome children. She answered all the questions about her husband with enthusiasm, all working well, earning money. But one day James disappeared, just disappeared. In the morning, as usual, he got ready for work, muttered something in farewell, stroked the children's heads, and left. He didn't come home at night or in the morning. He just disappeared. Miranda cut off the phone, trying to reach him. But the indifferent voice of the answering machine kept saying that the subscriber was out of the coverage area. Then Miranda, leaving her children in the care of a retired neighbor, rushed to the local police station, where she spent the better part of an hour trying to convince the officer on duty to immediately begin the search for her husband. But the officer on duty did not hurry, handed her a sheet of paper, and told her to write a statement about the disappearance, and at the same time deemed it necessary to share their experiences. Do you know how many people like you I have seen? Yes, almost every day they come here with round eyes, demanding their husbands to find them. They yell, trying to get through to the bosses. They threaten to tear my ears off, even call me a werewolf. And then it turns out that their husbands came in vain, whether they were out for a week, or out of bed with their mistresses, or even with their parents, all away from them. He does not like that from his wives. Miranda was indignant. They all are not. Indifferently, the policeman shrugged his shoulders and muttered something about the passing family values and the general moral decline. And it turned out that they were to blame for it all. The Miranda woman listened with irritation, running her pen over a white sheet of paper. Having written a statement, she held it out to the window. When are you going to start looking? Missing, when the officer on duty lazily inquired, and looked at the statement. Yesterday, in a day or 2 they will start. If necessary, of course. What do you mean, if necessary? Miranda resented and slammed her hand on the wall. The man is gone. She wrote a statement. What else is needed? Well, I told you. Maybe he's out walking. What do you mean walking around? She shouted. He's not like that. I already heard that, waved his hand on duty. Dismissed, young lady. You will be contacted. But Miranda did not think to retreat. She made such a noise that the lady here is looking for her husband, and I'm acting according to order. The major on duty stretched out, stared at her, still shaking with anger. Let's go to my office, he told her briefly, and turned to the duty officer. You have written the statement. That's right. He handed him a piece of paper. In a minute, Miranda was sitting in his office. The policeman sat down tiredly at the table. Tell me about it. And Miranda had to tell everything again. The officer listened, carefully without interrupting. When she finished, he remained silent. And you have no idea where he might have gone. Finally, he asked. She shook her head. Then he asked a few clarifying questions about scandals, marital difficulties, and alleged mistresses. None of that. Shedding light on her husband's disappearance, Miranda could not say. Yes, there had been hardships. Who doesn't? She doesn't know about mistresses. The last day she saw her husband. There were no quarrels and conflicts between them. The major's side, I'll take care of your case, he said briefly. You are free to go. Miranda returned home in a confusion of feelings. Her husband never showed up, not after 3 days, not after a week, not after a month. She had called the police station several times, and each time she received the same constant answer: "We are looking for you." Then Miranda finally lost faith in the police. So she began to look for her own. First, she went to her husband's workplace, where she questioned his coworkers for a long time. It turned out that with her colleagues, James was not on good terms, and he wasn't going to share his life plans. In general, no one knew anything, so she drove across town to his alcoholic father's house. She did find him at home, but he was in such a deranged state that she could not get anything coherent out of him. Her last hope to find out anything about her husband was his older sister, but she was not at home and her phone was off. Another month passed. Miranda was tired of crying. In addition, the children, seeing her like this, were themselves upset, though they did not yet understand why their mother was crying. So she gathered her will into a fist and tried to hold on. The lack of money added to her worries about her husband. Miranda did not work because she ran a household, so her husband was the only breadwinner. But now her husband was gone and no one knew where he was. And no money either. And the children want to eat. Miranda searched every corner of the house for her husband, but found nothing. She had the last $30 left in her wallet. There was about the same amount on the card, and ahead of her was the frightening prospect of starvation. Miranda called everyone she knew, of whom there were few in this alien city, and all from her former job. But she heard the same thing everywhere. "I'm sorry. Paycheck's late. Look, I'd love to, but I got fined myself. You know, they fine you for everything. I got a mortgage, I'm sorry. I can get $5 at the most, and it's gonna be a while. Who'd lend me money? We don't have a lot of room on our salaries. You know, no offense." Of course, Miranda was not offended and understood. After all, no one was obliged to give her the last, if not the last. Not obliged either. Everyone has their own problems and concerns, families and debts. After receiving a polite refusal from another phone caller, she despaired and walked slowly around the poorly furnished apartment, trying to figure out what she could sell, but there was nothing to sell. The house had no gold jewelry, except for her wedding ring and a silver cross she did not have either. The situation was deplorable. She had already removed the wedding ring with the firm intention of pawning it. Suddenly, she remembered the existence of another ring, which her husband had brought home. She saw it by chance in a desk drawer. She asked where had it come from, to which she received the unconvincing answer. Had been there, made the ring at a friend's house, and couldn't take it off on his own, and came home with him. The ring was massive, and by the way, obviously expensive. Although the real value, of course, she did not know. Miranda went into the desk drawer, but did not find the ring. Then she went through her husband's things again, and 2 hours later found the ring in the inside pocket of his jacket. In a minute, she was already sitting at the computer, researching the value of similar rings, poring over the websites of all American and foreign jewelry stores. But she couldn't find anything even close to it. Having spent half a day in vain and decently tired, she began to search for the address of a pawn shop. Here she was luckier. There were 9 pawn shops in their small town. She wrote out the addresses, took the ring, and rushed to the nearest one. She didn't think about the fact that it wasn't hers. After all, now was not the time for decency, when her own children were starving to death and the first she had no luck. The appraiser turned out to be a young lad who took a long look at the item. Then he made a conclusion that he could give her a maximum of $60 for the ring. Even far from all these cases, it was clear to her that it was tantamount to a free piece of jewelry. The second pawn shop was closed, so she jerked the door handle and turned around and went to the third. The appraiser at the third pawn shop had such a surprised face that Miranda deduced it was quite expensive, so she prepared herself for a long bargain, deciding she would haggle to the last. However, the appraiser thought of haggling too and asked, as it seemed to her, a very strange question: "Where did you get it from?" Miranda was indignant. Why should he care? She had brought it. It was his business to appraise and give the price, not to ask. Moreover, she could say nothing intelligible as to the ring's origin. She did not know her husband's friend. And in fact, to be honest, at the time she did not believe the story. Too unconvincing, her husband answered, too irritated by the fact that she had accidentally found the ring. "What do you care?" she asked. "How much is it worth?" The appraiser smiled. "Even more expensive than you can imagine." Miranda was encouraged by such honesty. Nothing prevented the appraiser from deliberately underestimating the price, and here's such honesty. "And how expensive?" "Businesslike," she asked, giving an indication that she had guessed it so much that I was afraid I wouldn't have enough cash. The appraiser answered evasively. "Do you mind if I call some people I know and ask them to bring me the money?" "What is the cost?" Miranda asked impatiently. 20 euros. Miranda's face pulled up in surprise. "Well," and it looked like such an ordinary ring. She nodded hastily. "Of course, I will wait. Don't worry too long." 20 minutes. These guys don't like to take too long either. The appraiser went to call from the roof deep in the pawn shop. Miranda took from a passerby on the premises, pondering what she would buy with the money. Her imagination pictured her freshly renovated apartment, a new dress, and new toys for the kids, a new washing machine and mixer. She would also be sure to send some of the money to her parents. Let them renovate the house, and at the same time rejoice in their daughter's success. By the way, her parents did not know about her husband's disappearance. She preferred not to share her problems with her elders, knowing how hard they felt for her. Time flew by with such thoughts. From the realm of rosy prospects, she was awakened by the appearance of 3 tough guys in leather jackets and impenetrable bandit faces. The appraiser nodded subserviently, put the ring in front of them, and silently pointed at the woman. "Hey, did you bring the ring?" One asked gruffly, playing with his muscles under his jacket. Miranda nodded frightened. Something told her she would never see the ring or the money again. A hunch flashed through her mind that no one was going to buy anything from her. Now they would take her out of town. They'll hit her over the head with something heavy. And that's the end of the old woman. "Where did you get it from?" The other one asked demandingly. "But don't let it get to you without any indulgences." "As if you found it, or gave it to me as a present." "What's the point?" Miranda gathered her courage and crossed her arms over her chest. "Where did you get the ring?" "I ask you." The big man barked. "She inherited it," she said, trying to keep the shivers out of her voice. "Why?" The guests looked at each other and laughed. They laughed long, mockingly, and loudly behind their backs. Chuckled subserviently appraiser chief heiress. It turns out, has. Laughing alone. "Aha, aha," as the great-granddaughter echoed. Another, the third, just swallowed and said nothing. Suddenly the laughter stopped. She was silently and roughly picked up under her arms and carried toward the exit. Miranda squealed, but the palm of her hand clamped tightly over her mouth. They shoved her into a jeep and drove her somewhere. Miranda struggled as hard as she could. But after a painful jolt to the ribs, she fell silent, shedding tears. "Where are you taking me?" she cried. "To see your ancestor, from whom you inherited a ring?" The boys answered her. "I have children," Miranda pleaded. "You should have thought of that before, and you're joking with us." "I brought the ring home. My husband said he took it from a friend." "What friend? Where does he live?" "I don't know." "It's true." Miranda almost yelled. "Husband, where did he disappear to?" Very conveniently, nodded one address. "Whose?" Stammering, Miranda asked. "Yours to go to you." "Let's check. Maybe your husband is at home." Miranda hurriedly gave the address. The jeep made a sharp U-turn and ducked into an alley. They cut the road. Miranda thanked fate that the children were now at her neighbors. 5 minutes later, she opened the door with shaking hands. The lock clicked. She was unceremoniously pushed aside and began searching through the small apartment. They checked the rooms, the bathroom, the balcony, and the kitchen. No one seemed to be home. She was pinned against the wall. "He's definitely gone." "Don't whistle." She nodded, swallowing her tears. They grabbed her by the scruff of the neck and dragged her out of the apartment. "You're coming with us." "I told you, you got the ring. What more do you want?" "Don't worry about it. The chief's gonna ask you a few questions, that's all. Just don't tell him any stories or you won't see your kids." She asked the chief cautiously, realizing that she was in deep trouble. She was not answered. They took her out of the entrance and put her in the car. All the way, She drove in silence, trying not to faint with terror, remembering all the prayers she knew and didn't know. 10 minutes later, the Jeep pulled up to a luxurious 3-story mansion. 3 minutes later, she was sitting in a luxurious living room in front of a short man with a cold stare. The man was about 50 years old, with graying temples, wearing an expensive robe. On her skinny fingers, she wore numerous rings. "Benjamin, here she is." She was nudged toward a chair. Benjamin waved his hand imperiously, and the thugs silently walked out of the living room. A skinny finger pointed imperiously to the chair. She sat down on the edge of a deep leather armchair and looked apprehensively at her landlord. "From where?" the man asked, pointing to the ring on the table. "I honestly do not know where my husband got that ring." "Tell me what you know." Miranda told it like it is, confused, repeating what had already been said. But Benjamin listened without interrupting, frowning his sparse gray eyebrows and tapping his thin fingers on the armrest of his chair. "You mean you don't know where your husband is now?" he clarified. When Miranda had finished speaking, she shook her head. "When did that happen?" he asked. "Gone when 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago." Benjamin repeated thoughtfully. "It is very interesting." Miranda's fear for her own life was joined by bewilderment. Suddenly, Benjamin was interested in her husband. What was the connection? Benjamin looked at her intimidated and silent. Suddenly, his frowning face suddenly acquired a good-natured expression. "Don't you tremble. Nothing bad will happen to you that way. What do you want with me? And my husband? What has that to do with the ring?" she asked, seeing that no one was going to kill her. "He stole it from you, yes. He probably didn't steal it from you, yes," the landlord answered thoughtfully. Miranda's head was spinning. Her brain refused to understand anything. "Who was it?" "That is what I want to find out. The fact is that 2 weeks ago, my wife disappeared. Disappeared off the radar. I didn't look for her much, because she's a piece of shit. But I was really worried about that ring. And then today it turned up. Benjamin wasn't talking to her, to himself. However, Miranda was beginning to guess. This bandit's missing wife's ring and her husband are connected. Only this is how. What has your wife got to do with it? You better ask me another question. Answer. Did he say anything to you before about his plans? Was he going somewhere?" Miranda thought about it, then shrugged. "You take your time, think about it. It is in your own interest." With a pressure, but without stopping to smile, said Benjamin. "What threats?" Miranda asked. "Why do you even ask? Why don't you tell me?" Benjamin sighed. "Well, if it helps you to think better. Anyway, I had a wife who was young and beautiful, and she disappeared. Just like your husband did 2 weeks ago. What's that supposed to mean?" She didn't understand. "What's the connection?" "That's what I'm trying to find out. And I'm hoping that you can help me. By the way, why did you take the ring to the pawn shop?" "I had to. Can't afford to feed the kids." Miranda lowered her eyes to the floor. Benjamin thought about it. What did he say after a brief pause? "If you help me, I promise your children will not need anything." How much was the ring valued at the pawn shop? Benjamin chewed his thin lips unhappily. A bargain, however. But never mind, you can help me. If you remember something important, you'll get that amount in cash without any fraud. "Yeah, what am I supposed to remember?" Miranda shouted. "I've already told you everything. Like where your husband was going. What did he tell you? Of course, I can involve my friends in the search for my wife. But I do not want to involve other people in my problems. And it's not like you're an outsider anymore." He grinned. But he grinned sadly, and I could tell he wasn't having any fun at all. "What's your wife got to do with it?" Too many questions raised Benjamin's tone. "Just give me the information I need." Miranda flinched. Benjamin's expression became hard again, and his eyes blazed with rage. "I have to go home and look through his things. Maybe there's something in the computer." Reluctantly, she said. "Now we're talking." Benjamin's face softened. "And take this." He handed her a golden rectangle, a business card. "If you find out anything, call, and it's in your best interest not to delay. Are you going to be taken?" he shouted, and the same Mussulman who had brought her here entered the living room. "Take her home," he ordered. "All the way home." Miranda wondered what and where to look for her. Miranda naturally was not going to procrastinate, even if she really wanted to. An almost empty purse and hungry children, on the contrary, gave acceleration. As soon as she was home, she began frantically going through her husband's things. What exactly was she looking for? She had no idea, but something that would shed light on this whole murky situation. Things flew to the floor, desk drawers and closets rattled her hands out, frantically turning out the pockets of jackets, pants, and shirts. Suddenly, she realized that among this mountain of stuff, there were not some of her husband's summer clothes. No tracksuit, no shoes, no swimming trunks and t-shirts. This was strange, since it was autumn outside, and those things should have been lying in neat stacks on the shelves, in shoeboxes and hanging on the shoulders in special covers. There was none of that, though she personally packed everything, and laying it out was also missing. Her husband's large gym bag, his passport, and his sunglasses. Miranda quickly sat down at the old computer and began to study the sites her husband had recently visited. She got into the history of her visits and immediately came across several sites about real estate in Cyprus. She pieced her thoughts together for a minute. Then she took a business card and dialed the number. Benjamin answered immediately. I rummaged through my husband's things and could not find summer clothes in the computer. He was looking for information on Cyprus. Briefly, she said. Benjamin was quiet on the phone for a while. Hello, she asked. I heard you, just thinking. So the lovebirds have gone on holiday to Cyprus. Doves. And you have not yet understood, he grinned into the phone. They ran away together. Oh, all right. Anyway, I understand you. It's not your job to take over from here. They'll call you when they know something. He dropped the call without saying goodbye. Miranda breathed a sigh of relief. However, the sad mood returned. The heaviness of unclear prospects and panicked thoughts came over her again. Where to get money? You can, of course, get a job, but where to put the children? It's too much red tape to give the neighbors at daycare, and it's constantly asking them and inconvenient. Maybe find a part-time job online. Fingers ran over the keyboard again. After 5 minutes, it became abundantly clear. Almost all of the ads required either experience and education or full-time employment. And all the ads for easy earnings on the internet just a scam, or requiring practical skills, which she never had. In desperation, she reached for the phone to call her husband's sister, who lived in another neighborhood. She was well-to-do. True, she had no relationship with her own brother. She didn't even come to their wedding. Miranda did not know the reason for this estrangement. She never dared to ask her husband about it. It was not her business after all. Miranda herself, by the way, had always had a bad relationship with her. Not right up to the war, but on rare occasions they tried not to talk to each other so as not to aggravate the already strained relationship. Her sister listened to a request to lend her a few thousand, instead of simply refusing or agreeing to it. She started telling Miranda off and asking unnecessary questions. From her sister's long monologue, Miranda understood that most likely he had never loved her and had simply left her for another woman. She spoke. It was calm. From what did Miranda conclude that she knew something? Do you know where he is? Miranda asked straightforwardly. What makes you think I would tell you? A sarcastic answer followed. Because he is my husband, the father of my children. Isn't that enough? And they are your nephews, Miranda argued. There was a heavy sigh on the phone, and then an expectant answer. What does this have to do with me? Is this your and James' problem? Not mine. I see. Well, you're not going to lend me money either. Let me get this straight, and you do not have to. Miranda agreed and said goodbye, wrapping her head and thinking. The phone rang unexpectedly. She flinched. It was her husband's sister. Hello. Listen, Lisa, I've been thinking. Anyway, I saw them together once. Yes, their sister-in-law answered gloatingly. She's such a spectacular lady. Really overdid it with the plastic on the cool car. And James is a pale mauve next to her. What's next? Miranda exhaled angrily. Do you know where he is? I don't know. He asked me through my friends to help him apply for a passport. How do you know from where? I know. What's next? My sister-in-law snapped. You know, the mistress of the passport. You also do not be stupid and think, I got it. Sister-in-law gave a mocking chuckle goodbye and passed out. Miranda took out her cigarettes. She smoked very rarely, only in moments of great stress, like now, for example. She sat down on the windowsill and took a long drag, looking out the window. Nothing but darkness outside the window and emptiness in her soul. And also loneliness and self-pity. And there was no one to go to, no one to call. Everyone has their own problems. Calling her elderly parents was out of the question. Suddenly, she felt that she couldn't stay at home, where she would just go crazy alone with her thoughts. She needed someone to talk to about anything, even silence, as long as she wasn't alone. She jumped off the windowsill, put her shoes on, and ran out into the damp night. After standing at the entrance, she resolutely walked toward the square, where a fire could be seen. As she approached, she saw several people around the fire. Apparently homeless, they sat silently and drank something from their mugs. Do you guys have anything to drink? Miranda asked. The homeless people looked at this respectable-looking woman with surprise. One advanced on the bench with a gesture, inviting her to sit down. Miranda sat silently, taking the extended mug. She sniffed it. It was cheesy, but she'd asked for it and drank it in one gulp. She took out a pack of cigarettes, took one out. She flicked her lighter, put the pack on the box. Help yourself. A shout of approval was heard. Several hands reached for the cigarettes. What's the matter? With compassion, one elderly man asked, in a torn, stained jacket. It's a long story. So sad and lonely that something became. Miranda shrugged her shoulders and shook the empty mug more pour. That's what, girl, you put the mug. Do not think. We do not feel sorry. But you will ruin your life, quietly said the old man. You don't need that last thing to drink from boredom, believe me. I'm a good example of that. Before you know it, you'll be on the downward slope going home. It'll all work out. There was so much anguish and sincerity in his voice that Miranda obediently put down the mug and hesitantly stood up. She walked home, and with each step she felt better. Why exactly didn't she know? Probably because someone unfamiliar and much worse than her had shown her so much concern, which she had always lacked. The thought of leaving her children at home while she drank in the company of strangers made her feel completely ashamed. When she returned home, Miranda looked at her husband's scattered belongings, picked up a large garbage bag, and began to throw things into it. She threw things with anger, thinking that she would not leave anything in the house that could remind her of him. Suddenly the thought occurred to her, why throw things away when they could all be turned into money, which she needed? She put her husband's shirt on the bed, pointed her phone camera, and took some pictures. Then she transferred the pictures to her computer through a cable and posted them on electronic classified services. I gave a description and an acceptable price. In 3 hours, almost all my husband's belongings were in the electronic flea market, even my favorite guitar and fishing gear. I did not know the price, so it took some time to study similar ads. After that, put my price reduced by half, prepared for a long wait. But the calls poured immediately. Someone was interested in the shirt, someone in the jacket, someone in the shoes and sneakers, too, found their interest. Miranda mentally even thanked her husband for his ability to wear and take care of things. So their condition was from good to very good. Someone asked questions about the suspiciously low cost and got honest answers. No money. We need to feed the children. Then people began to come and look at things. Someone even dared to bargain and nag at the unheard of low price. Miranda dutifully lowered the price. She took the money and closed the doors behind the buyers. She opened and closed that door 10 times during the day. The calls and trading continued the next day, and by the evening of that day there was nothing left of her husband's clothes, despite the fact that the items had been sold for next to nothing. She had a sum comparable to half of her husband's monthly salary. Miranda cheered up and immediately rushed to the store, where she bought all sorts of things. But not chocolates and kinder surprises of all kinds, but practical, inexpensive pasta, cereals, chicken, and vegetables. She will live frugally because it seems so much money actually, even in austerity mode, they would barely enough for 10 days. Well, at least her heart was no longer clenched in helplessness and fear of starvation. James and Kelly suffered little anguish and remorse, despite the fact that both had acted treacherously toward their spouse. James had absolutely no interest in how his wife and children were doing. And Kelly, long tired of her influential but old husband, was now enjoying the company of this attractive and young man. When they arrived in Cyprus, for the first time they did not live peacefully on the warm beach sand, swooning in the sea, in the evenings enjoying each other, on the hotel bed of a luxury room. After a week, when they were tired of the holiday, they finally got down to what they had come here for, the real estate business. They had money, and lots of it. Before they left, Kelly wired a tidy sum from her account to her lover's account. Through a realtor, they found another house. After meeting him on Cypriot soil, they took a long walk looking at houses. James was happy with everything, but the picky and spoiled Kelly wanted something incredibly fantastic. Her wish list confused the realtor somewhat. It was possible, but it required a different kind of money. After seeing another house, Kelly grudgingly wrinkled her lips. The houses were all wrong. The sea was far away. What can you offer us? Are they all the same? You have other options. The realtor, who speaks English very well, threw up his hands. It's a nice house, and it's not expensive. If you were willing to add another $50,000, I might be able to find something closer to the sea. Are you saying that the amount we have is insufficient? Kelly resented. Or maybe you better curb your appetites. And in vain, perhaps, we believed the recommendations and came to you. It seems that the cheeky American was going to have a serious fight with this, as she thought, tired realtor. Well, think about it. Quickly, James replied, to avoid a scandal. Now take us to the hotel. The realtor, confused by such insolence from his client, pointed toward his car. Of course, I'll try to find something suitable by tomorrow. In the car, Kelly tried to provoke a scandal, so James even had to yell at his mistress a little to cool her ardor. In the end, they fought, and the realtor, holding the wheel and looking at them in the rearview mirror, vowed not to do business with them again, pay little. But the pride, it's like they're giving away $1 million. In 10 minutes, he dropped them off at the hotel entrance and quickly left to heal their psychological wounds. They are extremely dissatisfied with each other and went to the reception for the key. You are expected. The receptionist pointed in the direction of the chairs. In the spacious lobby, they both turned around and literally froze in surprise and horror. 3 men had risen from their seats. A short, thin man with gray hair and a shirt, and 2 tall, ambitious men with muscles bulging beneath their shirts. Even though the man in the t-shirt wore Kelly sunglasses, she recognized him unmistakably as her husband. Her first reaction was to run away. She even took a step toward the exit, but her husband's warning shout forced her to abandon the attempt. Stay where you are. Before James could even make a sound, the thugs had him pinned on both sides. Her husband approached Kelly and whispered affectionately, "Hello, darling. I've come to see you." Kelly nodded, blushing rapidly and feeling her legs grow heavy and a chill sweep through her body. A second later, they were both pushed into the elevator. A minute later, the group was in a spacious double room. They were both thrown onto the wide bed. Benjamin took a chair opposite the bed with the prisoners. The thugs stood at the door. "All right, it's only hot in here." Benjamin clicked the remote control. The air conditioner obediently hummed, cooling the room. "Now it feels good. How are you resting? You sleep well. No nightmares." The prisoners were frightened silent. "Tell me," Benjamin demanded sadly, "how did you come to this life?" "How did you find us?" said Kelly timidly. "It was quite simple," my husband answered. "You better tell me how it is that you are a married woman. You ran away to the edge of the world with some dickhead." James the creep grimaced, but didn't say anything. With a wary glance at the thugs, "I'm just sick of all this," shouted Kelly. "What's that?" my husband asked calmly. "Everything." He got up from his chair and pulled his unfaithful wife to him. Yes, so sharply that the threads on her shirt band. "I'm tired of not working. Tired of going to salons and shopping. Tired of living off me. You're sick of that." Kelly lashed out and crouched in the corner of the bed. She pushed James, who was lying next to her. "Why don't you say something? Say something. You're a man." But James remained silent, continuing to stare apprehensively at her husband's bullying. And you could tell by that silence and the fear in his eyes that he was pulling back the keyboard. I went to the window under the light of the dim street lights, saw a car hovering with a punctured radiator, hugging a lamppost. There was no one on the street at this late hour, so there were no eyewitnesses. In other words, no one was rushing to help. James ran out of the office, climbed 3 flights of stairs, and ran out into the courtyard. By that time, a woman had already climbed out of the car. She was being rocked hard. Running up to her, James realized that it wasn't the accident that was making her jumpy, but the alcohol that was making her jumpy. The strong odor and slurred speech eloquently testified to that. The woman sat down right on the pavement, kicked off her shoes, and laughed hysterically. Then shuffled into the cabin under the seat, pulled out a bottle, and drank. "Everything is all right?" asked James. The woman looked up at him, cloudy, not quite sure what was going on. She nodded and drank again. James helped her up, took her away from the car, and sat her down on the curb, patted her pants pockets with annoyance, remembering that the phone was left on the desk in his office. "I have to call an ambulance," he said. "Do you have a phone?" The woman grimaced and waved toward the car. James cautiously approached the wrecked car, pulled a fancy case with rhinestones from the front seat. He walked over to the stranger and handed it to her. "What's brazen?" she asked, pulling out her phone and making a call. James unzipped the case and pulled out a cool smartphone, but the woman suddenly tugged at his pants. "You know you don't have to call anywhere," she said. She took the bag and the phone and threw them on the ground. "You'd better sit with me." James sat down next to her, looking at the car. "Don't worry, you squinted. The woman won't explode. It's not a movie. What's your name?" "James. My name is Kelly. Nice to meet you." James didn't know whether he was pleased or not, but as he looked at her from the side, he realized that the woman was attractive, at least to his taste. "I'm sick of everything," she said suddenly. "Everything, you know, everything. I'm sitting at home, like in a cage. Nobody pays any attention to me. Tell me, do you like me?" James confessed very much. "Why doesn't anyone pay attention? Aren't you married?" She burst into tears at this question and leaned against his shoulder. "I am. But there is such a husband that it would be better not to have him." She wanted a divorce, but he won't give her one. James listened to her lament and looked out the windows of the houses, where the lights began to come on and the silhouettes of the occupants, awakened by the noise. Someone was already at the window with a telephone, probably calling the police or an ambulance. The stranger continued to pour out her heart, and from this flow of speech, he learned that her husband, a rich and influential man, did not love or notice her at all. She is no more than a thing to him, whose absence he does not notice at all. James said nothing, just listened in silence, giving the drunken man a chance to talk. Then a police car pulled into the courtyard, followed by the fire department and then the ambulance. From there, everything was already according to procedure. Questions from the police about first aid, the evacuation of the car to the arresting place. Kelly was taken to the hospital. James went back to the office, but never got around to writing anything. All his thoughts were on her. He arrived home in the morning. His wife was still asleep. He could not sleep, wondering if they would meet again or not. 2 days later, a beautiful woman with a band-aid on her forehead came to him sober and in a cab. After a short search through the maze of office doors, she found him and invited him to a cafe as a token of her gratitude. James accepted the offer and went to the cafe with her. This time, Kelly was not so frank. To be honest, James even Miranda's wife could not boast of any particular beauty. Yes, she was pretty, pleasant, but she didn't have the appeal that his new acquaintance radiated. In general, she was losing to his new acquaintance. And then it all kind of unnoticeably turned around. They began to meet, of course, secretly, because her husband was quite influential in the city, and as they say, widely known in small circles. In one of these meetings, Kelly suddenly gave him a ring that looked expensive, although the real value of the product neither he nor she knew. "Keep it," she said. "Whose is it from?" He asked, examining her husband's piece. "He lost it, and I found it. I think we could use it. Can we use it?" He asked again. "Yeah, you wouldn't think I'd live with it forever, would you?" She grinned. "Even if I leave him, he won't leave me anything. I shall go make it. I hope to God that I live. And this ring, I think, is worth a lot. That's enough for us. And you and I need to take care of the overseas property. Real estate, I mean. You don't understand anything." She resented me. "As long as I have money in my account, we need to spend it wisely. And what's better than real estate? There's no point in buying anything here. Let's go to Cyprus and see what we can find. Do you want to live in Cyprus with me?" "Why in Cyprus, and not in Turkey?" he asked. "Probably cheaper, too." Kelly laughed. "I could tell you've never been anywhere. I've been to Turkey once and won't go there again. And real estate in Cyprus makes it easier to get a temporary residence permit. And then it's not far from permanent citizenship. Imagine you are a citizen of a country where the sun and the sea all the time. Also, do not forget that, if anything, we can profitably surrender this property. You won't be short of applicants." James shrugged his shoulders. He had no experience of buying houses abroad, so he fully trusted the words of the perky mistress. "And most importantly, we can hide from my husband there," Kelly summed up. James agreed. Yes, the argument. James, who had never traveled beyond the Sea of Azov and had never lived in luxury homes. To Cyprus he really wanted to, and so he agreed right away. And at that point he didn't care about his wife, his kids. What kind of family could there be if he had such an attractive, unpredictable, and at the same time practical and grasping Kelly with her? He would not be lost. Preparations for the so-called elopement took about 3 months. During this time, James secretly from his wife made a passport, studied real estate websites in Cyprus. Fortunately, no one controlled him at his work computer, and at the same time he did not forget to meet his mistress in the hotels of the city. And now he was shaking with fear, looking at his husband, his mistress, and wondering whether they would rip his head off right here or in the historical homeland. Benjamin began to pace leisurely through the hotel room, putting his hands behind his back. It was unclear from his nonchalant countenance whether he was angry or not. Even if he was, he skillfully concealed it. It was this restraint and the ability to keep his cool that had kept him alive. And not only did he survive and maintain his influence, but he was able to build up a decent, legitimate business selling cars. "You know, Kelly, I'm not even curious. How did you meet this one?" He pointed to James. "I'm more interested in how he got my ring. Can't you explain that?" Kelly closed her eyes in the hustle and bustle of lovemaking. She had completely forgotten about the ring. Just completely, as if it were a cheap trinket. Not her guarantee. Not to starve to death, in case of what Kelly flashed a glance at James. How did he know about the ring? She hissed with hatred, looking at her lover. The latter, confused, shrugged Benjamin, looking at their faces with a hearty laugh. "What's your name?" James nodded convulsively. "Well, James, if you hadn't been such a pig who abandoned your children, maybe I wouldn't have found you. Or rather, I would have found you. It's only a matter of time. Only I had better things to do." At these words, he glanced across the face of his unfaithful wife. Yes, more important than some woman. Thinking she could do anything. Though, to tell you the truth, I didn't think she'd have the nerve to have a lover. To run away with him. And most importantly, to expect her to get away with it. That's the height of chutzpah, of course. Well, that's not what I'm talking about. Your wife found that ring. She took it to a pawn shop because your children had nothing to eat. Do you understand? James didn't answer. You don't seem to understand. Your children had nothing to eat while you were having fun. Benjamin let his emotions get the better of him by raising his tone. But he quickly got a grip on himself and continued in an even tone. The ring is very dear to me. It's not so much what it's worth as who gave it to me. You want to hear? James didn't want to hear, but he didn't dare object either. So again, for the umpteenth time, he nodded silently. From Benjamin's short story, it became clear that he had inherited the ring from his brother who had been blown up along with the car. He had only identified his brother's body by this ring. So it is a memory of his brother and therefore an inviolable thing, and it's not a good idea to steal it, much less pawn it. I repeat my question, how did your wife get this ring? Asked Benjamin, having finished his story. Kelly gave it to me. James squeezed it out of himself, trying not to look his mistress husband in the eyes. I didn't steal it from you honestly. Coward. Kelly hissed contemptuously, kicking him in the side. Just a miserable coward. Pissed himself with fear. Why should I put my head on the line for a ring? He snarled and continued, looking at Benjamin. It was Kelly who stole it from you and gave it to me, saying that if something happens, we can sell it at a good price. It's worth a lot of money. Benjamin shook his head and sank heavily into his chair with the silent gaze of a scientist watching his lab rats. Considering his wife and her lover, he thought of the two thugs, frozen as huge blocks behind him. All that could be heard in the room was the slight noise of the air conditioner and the quiet wails of Kelly. The silence was unbearable, and James couldn't stand it. What are you going to do with us? He asked. I don't know yet, answered Benjamin peacefully. I think we can drown you in the Mediterranean Sea, of course. The local police would hardly look for you. I promise you that. I'll forget about your wife, honestly, pleaded James, honestly. Do you swear? Benjamin asked with a sneer. James nodded. Yes, I swear. Benjamin, snorting, went on. I'll go home, I'll explain everything to my wife, and I'll never even go near Kelly again. Speaking of your wife, Benjamin lifted his finger, interrupting this piggish flow. Why don't we call her now and ask her if she wants you back? He took his smartphone out of his pocket, poked at the screen with a businesslike look, and made a video call. Hi, he said cheerfully, holding the smartphone in front of him. He said. It was very friendly, as if chatting with an old friend. Hello, replied Miranda timidly. Her face was tired, without a gram of makeup. Anyway, I'm with your husband now. Benjamin turned the smartphone with the camera toward the lovers. I see, yes, I see. Miranda responded sadly. Look, I don't know what to do with them. Benjamin said cheerfully. My husband's begging for mercy. He wants to repent and come back to you. What do you think about that? And your wife is with him, I suppose. Instead of an answer, Miranda asked, That's right, don't you see? Benjamin agreed. Well, I can take care of her. I am more interested in what to do with your husband. Whatever you say, that's the way it'll be. We're kind of in the same boat, you and me, betrayed and deceived. What are the options? Benjamin laughed and turned the smartphone toward him. Well, you're good. There aren't many options, to be honest. Let's put it this way. Option number 1, your unfaithful hubby comes back to you with broken arms, knocked out teeth, but alive. Option 2, your husband gets eaten for lunch by Mediterranean sharks. And option 3, let's say he lives in a cardboard box among Cypriot bums. Miranda didn't answer right away. Benjamin waited patiently, looking into her tired face. I don't need him here for shit. Too bad for the sharks, in case they choke on him. So let him live in a box. Benjamin laughed. Miranda shouted at James. Come to your senses. What box? In a cardboard box, she shouted angrily. How do you say? Benjamin shrugged. I'll call you later. When I get back. He passed out and stared at Kelly. You know what? You live in a box too. You know what they say about heaven in the shack, right? He stood up and looked at his broad-shouldered assistants. Take away all their money, phones, cards, and documents. Take them somewhere in the local wastelands and leave them there. The thugs willingly stepped forward. And that's without hands. He's faint as it is. Benjamin pointed at James, fainting with terror, and went to the door. Grabbing the handle, he turned around. By the way, whose apartment is it? What apartment? What apartment? What apartment where your wife and children live is mine. I bought it before we were married. James was worried. It's where I'm registered and where I live. And you live in a box, Benjamin corrected her. Anyway, the way I figure it, you've got to live up to your homeless status. If by some miracle you get out of here, don't even go near your family's apartment, forget it. If she calls me and tells me your trouble, well, anyway, you get the idea. Benjamin shot him a long, cold look goodbye and walked out the door. Miranda looked at the silenced phone and suddenly cried. What she saw on the video link was like that joke when a wife returns from a business trip and finds her husband in bed with another woman. A bad, unfunny anecdote that somehow happened in her life. By some means, pulling herself together, she got up heavily from her chair and walked to the nursery. The children slept peacefully, sniffing in the pillow, satisfied and happily ignorant about the baseness of his own father. How to tell them about it she did not know. But perhaps now was not the time. Miranda carefully closed the door and went to the bathroom. She looked at her reflection and was horrified. She looked at some battered-by-life aunt. She mentally compared herself to her husband's mistress and noted that, of course, she was losing on all fronts. She was prettier and younger, though not by much. And there were all her worldly problems, expression lines, dim eyes, and disheveled hair gathered in a ponytail at the back of her head. Miranda sighed to her reflection and left the bathroom. She sat down at the table, took the paper, and began to write out the budget, trying to stretch it out as long as possible. To be honest, she didn't really believe Benjamin about the reward. They could promise and not deliver. And if you remind them, there's no telling what it might turn into. So here you have to rely only on your own strength. Miranda carefully wrote down in one column the name of products, in another, the utility payments, and in a third, what can be refused. So she sat for hours in calculations and doubts. She was interrupted by a telephone call, which was not at all exciting. Hello, I'm calling on behalf of Benjamin," said a male voice. "Hello," Miranda answered. "The chief called from Larnaca Airport and told us to transfer 20,000 euros to your account." Miranda felt how strongly her hands shook, how deeply her heart was beating. Suddenly her legs felt cotton. Yes, I'm listening." Inaudible, she said. "I'm listening to you," the voice replied nonchalantly. "I need your card number." "I don't have a foreign currency account." Well, did the chief see it coming? Actually, there are variants. We transfer it to a dollar account at the exchange rate, or I bring it to you in cash. "I think you should do it in cash," she muttered. "And in dollars." The address was briefly asked by a voice. In an hour, an intelligent-looking young man, with glasses and a suit, rang the doorbell. He busily handed her a dark, opaque package. "Will you count it?" he inquired. "No." "Why?" Miranda answered, frightened. "The chief also asked me to tell you that if you have any problems, call his phone right away." "You know." "What kind of problems?" Miranda looked worried. "Any kind. Especially if they are to do with your husband. Goodbye." Miranda closed the door behind him and opened the bag. Holding her breath, she examined the tight wads of bills. She sat down at the table, putting the package down, trying to come to her senses. Her head was spinning. Honestly, she couldn't fully believe what was in front of her now on the shabby kitchen table. A fortune. And for her, a fortune doubly so, because she had never seen such money in her entire life. She took such a bundle of crisp new bills, took out 2 stacks of paper, put it back in the bag, moved the list to her, and wrote in large letters, "Justice exists." Miranda put the children to bed and was about to go to bed herself. It had been a busy day. All day she walked with the children in the park, went for a ride on the merry-go-round. We went to the movies and the zoo, and now her feet were just falling off. But her mind was at peace. With confidence in the future, she no longer had to think about how she would pay the rent, what to feed the kids, what to dress them in. The financial cushion warmed her and gave her strength. She was already falling asleep when suddenly the phone rang. It was Benjamin. It was like a dream away. The last time it had been a month ago, from a hotel in Cyprus. "Hello," she said. "Are you awake?" asked Benjamin. Instead of a greeting, no longer, and that your hubby is being expelled from the country to his homeland. Miranda felt cold. Over the past month, she had grown weary of her husband. She even remembered him less and less often. What had he done? Nothing, except that he was there illegally. Benjamin answered calmly. "Got caught stealing some nonsense. They got him, and now they're sending him back here." "Should I be scared now?" Miranda asked. I don't think so. He answered calmly. Why am I calling you? I warned him, of course. Well, who knows? Maybe he has a short memory. In general, there will be problems. Call me right away. All right, thanks. What about your wife? She's not my wife. She was luckier already. She found some local guy, and now she's living with him. Kelly, she's not gonna let her down. I feel sorry for that man in absentia. Anyway, we talk a lot, so call me if you need anything. Miranda looked at the silenced phone. People like this Benjamin always frightened her. They always seemed dangerous. But the strange thing was right now. The realization that you had such a patron, on the contrary, breathed confidence. It's always nice to know that someone will stand up for you. But James never showed up at all. And where was he? She didn't know what was wrong with him, and she kept catching herself thinking that the more time passed, the less interested she was in his fate. That's what happens when you are betrayed, when you cross a person out of your life forever. She deposited the money. The bank had such paltry interest that she decided to get a job. Miranda's parents had moved in with her, and now she could go to work without fear that the children would be left unattended. She got a job as a conductor in a streetcar depot. And it was a hell of a job. No one had ever gotten on her nerves like that. Just give me a reason to make a fuss. Conductor, why don't they announce the stops? Conductor, why are we standing? Conductor, how long we can wait for your streetcar? Conductor, why are you giving change and change? Conductor, why do you carry drunkards? Conductor, why does the door jam? And so on and so forth. But Miranda was building character. A smile on her face, a calm tone. A polite response. Although each outing on the line for her was akin to execution, she was going to quit her job 100 times. But looking at her children, she gathered her will in an armful and went to work. In the evenings, she cooked, played with the little ones, and then went to bed. In the morning, everyone thanked her parents first. They helped her a lot. She didn't even think about another man. Having decided to devote herself to raising children, she just wasn't up to it. But it happened that she had to reconsider her life attitude the day she met Michael. It was business as usual. Her shift was ending. Suddenly at one stop a man walked in, nice, polite, neat, dressed. Tell me please, Moscow when? He asked, holding out his money. It's the last stop. One stop later, Miranda answered. She handed over the ticket and continued walking. And at that moment, the streetcar stopped, and so abruptly that she couldn't help herself. She fell down on the woman who was sitting by the door. A woman, what an uproar arose. She was accused of being drunk and getting on the line. And on top of that she was fat and clumsy. Although this was far from true, Miranda was skinny. The passengers also accused her of the fact that some car had suddenly crossed the road in front of the streetcar and suddenly stopped the streetcar. What's she got to do with it? Shouted the very nice man in her defense. By the way, he was the only one who stood up for her. The others, who had not even made ridiculous accusations against Miranda, preferred simply to turn away to the window and remain silent. The crowd turned its gaze to him, and the poor man heard many unpleasant things about himself. However, it was obvious that he did not care much for the opinion of the crowd. What could not be said of Miranda? The resentment was choking her. She just wanted to cry. Miranda returned to her seat and closed her eyes, enjoying the minutes of relative silence until the next stop. What a job you've heard. She then opened her eyes. The man looked at her with sympathy and with regret. Miranda smiled and shrugged. It could be worse. Thank you for stepping in. No problem, he smiled. That smile made her feel at ease, as if nothing had happened. And in her direction now dozens of angry eyes of the passengers are not looking. She smiled back at him. There were only 2 people at the next stop. Giving them their tickets, she returned to her seat. Is yours next? She said to the man. Thank you. He smiled and headed for the exit. She followed him with a glance and sincerely regretted that he had left so quickly. The man was pleasant and polite, and she could tell by his open face and honest eyes that he was decent. From then on, she saw him almost every morning between stops. They talked. She learned that his name was Michael, and he drove to work every morning. Came to town, recently divorced, and has grown children. He works, lives in a rented apartment. I myself, not expecting Miranda, began to wait for these meetings. He confessed that he was intentionally watching for someone to be a conductor at the bus stop, and that he would only get on her streetcar. And what a surprise! Or did it just seem that way to her? There was less evil around. Either people around have become kinder, or all the rude and scandalous people. Or maybe they were all rude and scandalous. She couldn't answer that question. And then they started dating. Miranda introduced him to her parents, who also liked him very much. Michael knew how to woo and compliment, but he did it unobtrusively and without that beautiful romance. Each lived in his own territory, but Michael often came to visit, played long hours with the children, or did things around the house. For example, he repaired a faulty microwave and fixed the door lock. All in all, everything was good. Miranda felt needed and wanted. They already considered themselves almost family. But one day her legitimate husband James showed up. It was an ordinary day off. Miranda was playing with the baby, and Michael was repairing the stove in the kitchen. So inopportunely, the doorbell rang. Miranda went to open it. And at once she froze when she saw her husband on the threshold, a drunken and silly smile wandering across his face. "Well, hello, wife," he puffed on her face. He leaned against the jamb not to fall down. "Why did you come?" she asked, instead of greeting, looking at her husband. He did not look well. Swollen eyes, stubble for days, and shaking hands. Apparently James had been drinking heavily and uncontrollably. "Actually, this was my apartment," he declared. "And the kids were mine, too." "I don't think you should see the kids in your condition," she objected. "And as for the apartment, let's share it. I don't mind. By the way, where do you live now?" "At the comrades in the dorm." He grimaced. "With cockroaches and drunks. You're no better yourself," she said and went out to the stairwell, shutting the door behind her. She didn't want her parents and kids to hear, and neither would her new chosen one. Seeing her husband didn't do her any good. She didn't want any scandals. "I won't forbid you to see the children, of course, but you won't come in this state again," she said firmly. James smirked. "How long have you been dictating terms to me?" "Since you cheated on me, betrayed my children, and went to the resort with your mistress." "By the way, how did she hear she found someone in Cyprus?" "Your intelligence, I see, is super." He grimaced. "Of course, with a patron like that. And Kelly wasn't the right person for me. We've all made mistakes in our time," Miranda shrugged. "Do you mean me now?" Bitterly, he grinned. "Disappointed, you mean? What do you think?" She squinted. "How should I feel about my traitorous husband?" "I'm actually here to make peace," James muttered. "Shall we start over?" Miranda just laughed in his face. "Are you serious? I don't know what you hope for. How can you expect anything in this situation?" He slid down the wall and covered his face with his hands. "Who? Who asked you to give him the ring? Who howled at him?" "I didn't. I wanted to pawn it at the pawnshop, but it turned out to be a powerful man's ring. This is all your fault. Took all the money out of the account and ran out on the kids. How am I supposed to feed them? Have you thought about that? And now you're going to accuse me of something else." Miranda's voice rang through the hallway. The door opened and Michael came out, seeing a strange man sitting at the wall, and asked if she was all right. "Yes," she answered. "By the way, I would like you to meet my husband, the one I told you about." Michael was already there. I wanted to extend my hand to him as a greeting, but quickly removed his hand and frowned. "And why did he come here?" "I don't know." I shrugged and looked at James. "Why did you come here?" James stood up and looked at the unfamiliar man with an intriguing look. He must have thought he had broad shoulders and a tall stature. He didn't say anything to him, but he gave his wife a devastating look. The old woman did not suffer long. He hissed viciously to Miranda. "Quickly found a man for herself. None of your business." "What did you say? None of my business?" James snapped. "You take men into my apartment, and you say it's none of my business." He went at her with his fists, but Michael quickly shut her down. "Listen to me," he said menacingly, shaking him by the side of his jacket. "You get out of here now, and don't let me see you again. Understand? This is my apartment. and you're on my property now. He's going to tell me what to do here," James shouted, clenching his fists in impotent anger. "Get out of here. Get out of my apartment. It's legally mine. And let the kids get out too. It's cold," Miranda asked. "So are the children," he shouted out. "We don't know if they're mine yet. Maybe that's what got you pregnant." Miranda slapped him across the face, and Michael looked at James in amazement. It must have been very strange for him to hear that. Miranda, of course, had talked about him, but always limited herself to meager phrases like cheated, left, and all without much detail. As it turned out, she was the one who still chose her expressions. He could not have imagined that everything was so messed up. The husband turned out to be a real moral monster. Michael made up his mind at once. However, he had long intended to clarify his relationship with Miranda. And now, it seems, was the right opportunity. "Let's talk seriously," he suggested to James. "I'm not going to fight you." James took a step back, just in case. "No one's going to fight you," Michael said squeamishly. "That's not what I mean. You give Miranda a divorce, and we're moving out of this apartment. All of us together. And your legal dwelling remains at your complete disposal." Miranda stared at him in amazement. But by the expression of his serious face, she realized that Michael was not joking at all. He was currently living in a rented apartment because the apartment he had bought in a building under construction was to be commissioned in the first quarter of next year. The apartment was small, but it was a 2-room apartment, as they say, in a cramped space. No hard feelings. "Will you marry me?" he asked Miranda bluntly. She nodded, totally confused. "I'm going to cry." "You're so sweet," James said wryly. "However, I give you my blessing. I agree to the divorce. All of you, get out of here, will you?" "Don't be so quick to temper your fervor," said Michael. "Since you have children, the divorce will only be through the court, and that will probably take more than 1 month. So for the time being, Miranda will live here. And in the meantime, a suitable rented accommodation is still for me to wait a few more months?" James roared. No, let's get out today." Michael closed his eyes and exhaled convulsively. It wasn't easy for him to hold back, but he tried. "Tomorrow you start divorce proceedings, and while they're going on, she's going to live here. Are you going to be a troublemaker?" "I'll call Benjamin," Miranda warned. The mere mention of Benjamin made James lose his stature, and his belligerent mood abruptly disappeared. He muttered something angrily and went down the stairs. Miranda called Benjamin after all. He listened attentively and said, "Why didn't you call me?" "I warned you." "I do not know. It just happened." Benjamin was quiet, then said approvingly, "And your new man? Well done. I respect him. Why couldn't you find a decent one before? I could ask the same of you. Couldn't you find a normal woman before?" Miranda asked, and then she stopped talking. Benjamin was not the right person to talk to like that. He laughed benignly, to her surprise. I am silent. "Well, if you want, I can settle the matter of your husband." "How?" she asked. "Quite simply," Benjamin answered. "No, don't," Miranda exclaimed, inwardly cold. "It would be better to be peaceful." "You shouldn't. I would have shown him how to ignore my words." "Well, it's up to you how you want." "Well, then let me help you with the divorce. I've got the right connections in court. I can speed up the process. To be honest, I'd like to help you somehow. It's not like you're a stranger to me anymore. Thanks for nothing. And take care of your new man. He's the real deal," said Benjamin goodbye. Benjamin kept his word. He pushed the right pedals, and in a month, Miranda was in a formal divorce, and James as a payer of alimony. In addition, Benjamin helped them find a bigger rented apartment where they moved to while they waited for Michael's apartment to be built. A year later, they had their wedding in Michael's new and spacious apartment. It was an ordinary wedding, no fancy, all their own. Miranda's parents, Michael's grown children, neighbors from work. But among these ordinary people, there was one complicated guest, a man widely known in narrow circles, better known as Benjamin. No one but Michael knew what connected this businessman with a criminal past, an ordinary streetcar conductor. So they were at a loss to speculate, but they dared not ask, having simply decided for themselves that it is better not to know, because knowing less makes you sleep better